Okay, so I'm just going to ask you some questions about the BLM movement and why you support it.
Okay.
The first question is, why do you think it's important to be an advocate for BLM?
Well, I think it's important because it's not really just a movement, it's about equal rights for everyone. And it's important because it's 2020 and people of color still have to deal with racism.
Okay. Why does it matter? What about it matters the most to you? Because it's like a whole movement, but it stands for different things.
Right. In my opinion, it's about getting justice for Black lives and to make sure they get the equality they deserve. That's what it that's why it matters to me.
Okay. Um, how would you describe the protests that you attended?
Well, I've been to at least I think 3 protests, and um, I went to a Justice for George Floyd protest that was in Huntsville, and it was very peaceful. And I also went to one protesting the Confederate flag that's at City Hall, and there were counter protesters there, so it was completely the opposite of that. And the counter protesters were yelling, and they were yelling disgusting things, homophobic things, racist things, and they also were like destroying property. So it was completely the opposite of the other protest I went to.
Would you say that during the pandemic, it was like smart to still do protests?
Well, yes and no, because when I went to the protests, me and my friends went together to protest the Confederate flag. We all wore masks and we were all careful, but the counter protesters weren't wearing masks at all and they were screaming in people's faces. So I guess it just depends on what you're fighting for and what you care about. So
So you think that it was worth risking getting corona?
that's a good question. I think I think the people that weren't wearing masks were not wearing masks because they don't care and they only care about the Confederate flag staying where it is, even though it doesn't even represent the United States. It represents the separation from the Union. So they're fighting against the the United States itself. So they really don't care about other people, and I don't think they think COVID exists. So they only care about themselves. So it just depends.
um, did attending the protest change your political views at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I've always cared about other people a lot. I've always cared about equality, and I always will. And Black Lives Matter, it's not really a political thing to me, even though people make it out to be.
Mhm.
It's just something that people deserve equality, and that's it for me.
Okay. Um, has it caused you any issues to support the movement?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is Alabama, so obviously people are very against it. And
Has it caused
I've
you?
lost friendships.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're fine. I've lost friendships, but losing a friend is very different from living your life as a person of color having to deal with racism. So I am definitely okay with losing a friend because I don't have to go through something like that. And honestly, losing a friend over racism and the topic of racism, I'm fine with it. I would rather have friends that love other people and care about other people than some that only care about themselves.
Yeah, so have you lost any like family members?
No, surprisingly, no. I have one side of the family that is very against it, but I guess I just haven't been around them often enough to speak my point of view. It hasn't happened yet, but eventually it probably will, and I'm
Thanks.
not going to be up over it.
Thanksgiving is going to be where it's at. That's going to start a war.
Oh, yeah.
Um, um, let's see. What are your thoughts on people who don't support the movement?
Well, people that don't support the movement, it's because they think the Black Lives Matter movement was created to put Black lives ahead of other lives
Mhm.
when it's just not true at all. And that's what the media is saying, that, well, my life matters too. Well, of course it does. That's the whole point, is we're trying to say that Black lives matter just as much as yours, not any more or any less.
Do you think that it's going to accomplish everything that people is hoping to accomplish?
Well, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is going to be in the history books. It's going to be talked about just like the civil rights movement was. And this movement has a lot of comparisons to the civil rights movement. And that's good and bad because people are still having to fight for their rights in 2020. I
Hmm.
think it will accomplish justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many more.
I don't know if you voted for Biden or if you voted for Trump, but since Biden currently won about 6 times this month, um, do you think that Biden will be able to get anything past the Senate to help the Black Lives Matter movement?
I hope so. There's a lot of controversy in the Senate right now about who's doing what, but I think hopefully between Black Lives and Joe Biden, they will team together and get something across.
What do you think about the looting and the riots?
I love that question because obviously looting is bad. Some people have taken advantage of the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests by looting.
Mm,
Like when I went to a protest, after it was all over, there just so happened to be looting involved, and people just assumed it was because of the protests, but it wasn't. And I don't agree with looting, but if I were a person of color in 2020, I would be angry. And some people use the looting as an argument for why the Black Lives Matter movement is bad, but they forget that, like, during the civil rights movement,
mhm.
white people would bomb churches just because they had black people in them. And they try to compare those things, but one is obviously way worse than the other. So,
So this goes back to being pro-life and pro-choice, but statistics show that more Black babies are aborted, and the Black Lives Matter movement is talking about how all Black lives matter. Does that mean that you're pro-life, or does that go a different way?
no, that is a great question. I like that. Okay. I am very pro choice
You do.
because when it comes down to it, every life matters. Babies' lives matter, adults' life matter. But when it comes down to it, every person, and that's just end of story. That's all it should be.
Hmm. What do you think about how more Black people are killing other Black people than actual white people killing Black people? So it goes back to it not being a hate crime when it's Black on Black. But if all of Black lives matter, why are they not covering those issues?
Hmm. Well, I don't know specific statistics about that, but there's a difference between black on black crime and white on black crime because a greater percentage of white on black crime has racism involved. And white on white crime, black on black crime has nothing to do with racism, obviously, because the race would be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And
Um,
I think that's something that needs to be talked about.
okay.
Go ahead.
What, so you said you went to 3 protests for
Yes.
the BLM movement. Um, so in all 3, were there always people, were the majority of people wearing masks, or was it just like the occasional few?
Well, a majority of the protesters were wearing masks. However, the counter protesters were not wearing masks. And I think that just has to do with a mindset thing and only caring about, themselves or thinking COVID isn't real, even though the last time I looked on the news, there had been 1,000 people that had died from it today alone in the US. And it's something that we have to work on, especially in Alabama. I go in the store all the time and see people not wearing masks, even though it's mandated.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that's something we need to work on too.
Do you think systematic racism is real?
Yes, I do. I mean, the whole topic of racism has been going on for however long the world has been around. I mean, sadly, I think it's going to be happening for a long time, even though it shouldn't be happening today.
Yeah. Um,
Dog barking.
yeah, you can hear Abby's music. What do you think about a scenario where it's three black men, one's a police officer, one's currently on trial, and the other one's his lawyer? What do you think that falls into if people say that if you're black, you can't really do much with your life here because of the racism, but yet we see amazing black people as influencers and lawyers and doctors? What do you think that does to the
That's a
BLM?
great question.
Because I know that the BLM movement
I
has some
think
really powerful
that,
people.
right, yeah. I think that has a lot to do with the BLM movement, and that's a great question. Gotta think a little bit. I think that is a good viewpoint of position of power, and that some might have advantages over others, whether skin color, gender, anything like that. And some may say that you can do anything you want. This is the United States. However, some people have disadvantages, and some grow up in bad situations. And there's some things you can't control, and some people have to fight for what they want and fight for what they love. And that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that.
Do you think white privilege is real?
100%. Absolutely. It is 100% real. Because if I ever were to get pulled over, God forbid, that hasn't happened yet, thankfully, I wouldn't be scared as much as my best friend probably would be because she is a black woman. And she has told me many horror stories about having to walk across City Hall and seeing the Confederate flag and being scared of that. But that's not something that scares me because I'm a white person and I have privilege and I have been given privileges that others might not have.
Okay, when you think about police brutality, do you think that abolishing the police system would be smart? Because I know that they say to defund it, but some people really want to abolish it.
Right. That is something that I have been up and down about because we obviously need a justice system. We need firefighters, we need police officers, we need medical, we need all of that because that's how you function as a society. I think the problem with police brutality is that there's not mental health background checks. There's not any form of system where, oh, this person has something wrong with them. That could be turned into something bad, or that could end up where someone dies when they didn't have to. And I definitely think we need better background checks on police.
Okay, what do you think about people who say all lives matter?
Well, all lives matter. They do matter. And I think the people that say all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter just want to feel included or feel oppressed in some way because someone saying Black Lives Matter, oh, they'll get offended by it because, well, my life matters too. Of course it does. But that's not the problem that we're talking about. We're talking about racism. We're talking about systematic oppression. We're talking about all this stuff that has been pushed aside and people pretend it's not real when it's happening every day.
Mm. Do you think that since everything kind of started with George Floyd, do you think that George Floyd was the right person to fight for? Considering the fact that they released body cam footage and he was resisting?
Hmm. Right. Well, I think George Floyd should still be alive today, and his life mattered just as much as your life or mine. And the video of him screaming that he can't breathe has made so many people upset. And of course, it's going to make people want to fight for him because he did not deserve to die. And yes, he might have been resisting arrest, but he should not have been put in that position in the first place. He was, police were called on him for a false check or something that was like $20 worth, and it was real. And he was pinned down over something that shouldn't have even happened. And he
Mm.
died for no reason. Of course, people are going to fight for him, and he deserves to be fought for, no matter what the situation was.
Have you ever been harassed while wearing something that says Black Lives Matter? Besides at that
I
protest?
don't think so. Right. I don't think so. I think it's just depending on where I am that I would get harassed. I'm pretty sure if I was in the grocery store and I wore that shirt, someone would say something, but I had never been harassed for wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the misleading information about the movement? Like where they say that it's all riots and looting when it's proven that
Right.
97% of them are peaceful.
Mm-hmm. Well, misleading information is obviously, spread through the media, and it's to make the Black Lives Matter movement look bad. But when it comes down to it, the movement is just about equality. And the media just are people that probably say all lives matter or white lives matter or blue lives matter, are people who are just angry that we're trying to fight for equality for Black lives.
Do you think that um, you can support both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter?
I believe you can support the police system and police officers, but I believe there's no such thing as a blue life. You are not born blue, you are born black. There is a major difference. You apply to be a cop, you don't apply to be a black person. And while I support police officers and everything they do, because most police officers are good people, there are just so many that make them look bad. I don't think you can support blue lives and black lives because they're two drastically different movements.
Mhm. Do you think that mm, the question left my mind? Um, is there anything that drew you into the movement? Like I know you said that you've always cared about everybody, but is there any like specific person that you were like, I gotta fight for you because you deserve to be equal to everybody else?
Well, my best friend, Jerica, is a black woman. I think I mentioned that earlier, but the fact that she feels scared to be by herself on the streets of our city, it just broke my heart. And she shouldn't have to walk around town and see the Confederate flags everywhere and be scared. I think I started to care about Black Lives Matter because of her, but I will continue to care for the millions of other Black lives as well.
What are you hoping that they accomplish like the most? Just like equality and what
Right,
else?
right. I mean, equality, obviously, but I think the Black Lives Matter movement can be tied into police brutality as well, and that is something that needs to be fixed. I mean, police officers should be viewed as the heroes of our nation, and they're just not anymore. I mean, they haven't been for a while because of police brutality.
Do you
And
think it's fair to say that when you step back and look at statistics, only 1% of them are involved in actual cases of police brutality?
absolutely, because that 1% shouldn't be there. If
Mm.
you're a police officer, you're fighting to save our country and you're fighting for your job, and it shouldn't be, oh, I'm going to hurt this person because I feel like it. No, that's not something that should be tangled up with that job title. It's just not something that should be happening at all.
Yeah. Um, do you think that it's fair to connect instances where white people have died the same way that George Floyd died? Do you think it's fair to like compare those two?
Depending on the situation, like if someone was mentioning George Floyd and a crime by police brutality of a white person was brought up, there may be some racism involved in that situation. However, when talking about police brutality happens with any race. It just something that shouldn't be happening. Most of the time it is people of color, but it should be talked about either way.
Mm-hmm. Um, is there anything that has stood out to you in any of these protests?
Well, absolutely. Seeing how angry the counter protesters get when all we want is a flag to be taken down that doesn't represent us in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Like I witnessed a guy, we were having like a calm protest and people were singing and we had a projector, and this guy got a knife out and he stabbed the projector. And there was also one guy that threatened and said he had an AK-47 in his car and that we should go look and see what's in his car. It's just the amount of hatred people have for others that just want to be equal to them just blows my mind.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever been in a racist situation?
Not me personally, no, I haven't.
Have you been in a
I've
situation where you've heard somebody be racist to somebody else?
Yes, all the time. And
Besides like the protests, like besides being at the
right,
protests and having that
right.
like in your
Yeah, it
daily life.
yeah, I would definitely hear people say things like in the hallways at school and use racial slurs and everything. I never know who would say it because it would be like across the hallway or something. But it would just amaze me that people felt the need to say it just to be racist.
Do you think that the N word should do you think that it's okay for black people to say the N word?
Yes, I personally believe that that is a word they can be able to say because that is a word they have claimed. And when other people say it, it offends them. So why would you say it? Because it offends black people. But if they feel like they want to say it, they should be able to say it.
Okay. Um mm, what do you think about the police system using excessive force? Do you think that was needed?
No. I mean, excessive force is exactly what it is. It is force that wasn't needed and was unnecessary, and it should never be used, like ever.
Um this only happened with like the peaceful protest. But do you think that the police system decided to use excessive force because they were scared since there was so
Well,
much looting going on at the time?
right. I mean, that's a good question again. Good job. I think that excessive force in cases of protests probably had nothing to do with police being scared. I mean, of course, in crimes like murder or robbery, I'm sure a police officer would be scared. But when it comes to looting, police are trained to know what to do and know how to respond. So excessive force should not be needed. They should know exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But when there's people like Kyle Rittenhouse, I think that's his name, going and down a street with an AK-47 and no force is used on him until the last minute, that doesn't add up. It just really doesn't.
Yeah. Um, I had another question and it left my mind. Um, why do you think we're still dealing with stuff like this now, like in this century? Why do you think it's still going on?
Right. I mean, especially being from the South, it has to do with how you were raised. Racism is not born, it's taught. And it will continue to be a problem if people don't open their minds and just accept other people. And equality shouldn't even be talked about today, but we're still having to fight for it. And it will continue to be a problem until it's solved.
Okay, I don't know if I've already asked this question, but I know I asked it in a different interview. And it came down to being pro-life and pro-choice because
Yeah.
statistics show that more black babies are aborted than, well, babies, because there's different stages and some are not really considered babies, but that more black babies are aborted than any other race. But the BLM movement stands for Black Lives. So does that mean that you would be pro-life because every life counts?
Mm-hmm. Well, you did ask this question, but
Oh.
I think I think it just has to do with your body and your choice, and it doesn't matter what race you are. You should just be able to do whatever you want with your body, and no man should try and tell you what you can or can't do.
I agree with you there because I'm pro-choice all the way. Um,
Yeah.
so now that Biden's been elected, and I will stick to that up until somebody tells me otherwise. Um, since he supports the BLM movement a good bit, do you think that if he were to condone the looting and letting people take out their anger, do you think that it would make the BLM movement accomplish more, or do you think it would drag them back down? Because then everybody who's racist would be like, see, they're just burning down cities, they're just making everything worse. Do you think it
Right.
would help or make it worse?
Well, it definitely makes it worse because most of the time the looting isn't even involved with the actual protests. I've
Mhm.
seen it firsthand, but the looting, I haven't heard much about it lately, but it needs to slow down and eventually stop because it's not helping the BLM movement at all. And it's just making the movement look worse and an easier target for other people who do not support it.
Yeah, because that's the way I look at it. I think that if there's looting going on, then it's making the movement look terrible. But there's not that much looting in
Right.
the first place. Um,
Mm-hmm.
well, I think I've covered everything, so thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna stop this. So I'm just gonna